Or hopefully the audio works with us as we are recording chapter 8 of our Old Testament Disciple with our fast-track study manual on page 60, the keyword security, and the chapter titled The People with a King. Last week we talked about the people without a king. We talked about Joshua and Judges. This week we get to go from all the way from the beginning of the kingship, understanding of the people of Israel as they settled in this new land, all the way through the split of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. As I've told Marty through the years, Marty, for some reason I've missed this class in the past, and when Marty has taught it, he always says, that's a semester. You give me 40 minutes and you're telling me to do it for a semester. And I just keep saying, yes, we go each week and it's a whole semester that we should have learned, and we're going to do it in about 35 minutes. So we cover a lot of ground, and I want to cover kind of the historical ground before we get into kind of our concept about holiness tonight, because I felt like as I looked back at the last couple of lessons that I taught, wanted to have a guest speaker this week, that maybe I missed that. So I just want to make sure that we get to sort of how to know where we are geographically and theologically and even sociologically as the people of God who have settled in the land and built a temple before we get to, after Thanksgiving break, we're going to have a 2-week section on exile. So this is with that last week and this week was kind of our couplet with people without a king and people with a king, taking the land, inhabiting the land. Then we're going to have our Thanksgiving break week, and then the next week's going to be our 2-week back-to-back on kind of warning and consequences, kind of like this. Exile is coming, but to be able to understand exile, you kind of need to know where we are, how we got here, and how we're going to behave. And so our ancestors have taken this land, and they're going to try to figure out how are they going to be the people that they're going to be. So last week we talked about people who were trying to inhabit Shema as they take on the new land and how they were forgetful and how they come to this moment of receiving a king. So our human condition on page 60, I'll read for us, and then respond to that with our mark of discipleship. And then we'll look at 1 Samuel 8. We demand leaders, hoping they will bring security and peace. We want our leaders to make decisions for us, to tell us what to do so we won't have to take responsibility for ourselves and our actions. But power tends to corrupt, and we discover our leaders, like us, have feet of clay. And this little assignment this week I thought was really good. So I'll read that just this little piece because I think it sums up a lot of the stories and big characters we read about this week. This week we'll read fascinating narratives of explosive emotions and human and divine interactions. The characters are some of the most colorful in Scripture. People like Hannah, Eli, Samuel, Saul, Jonathan, David, Bathsheba, Absalom, Solomon, and the Queen of Sheba. You must read rapidly to cover so much story material, and you may have found that this week as there were a lot to cover. If you turn all the way over to page 66, you'll have our mark of discipleship. And it's a fine one, but I do think that we can have a better conversation tonight about what we find in the Kingship and Temple period than what we have here. Disciples maintain a perspective on leadership that supports and respects godly leaders, but gives true allegiance only to God. That's a fine mark of discipleship. Man, do I think that more is going on theologically, geographically, and sociologically as the people of God are becoming a different type of people in a new land with a new understanding of who they are. So the people of God have been nomadic, and they have been following after God essentially with a fire by night and a cloud by day. There's just sort of this sense of God being with them. And when they take the land, they become a people who rely on 2 words. I should have written them on the board: kingship and temple. So the people of God, as Israelites, are going to understand themselves following after Yahweh in a particular kind of time and place and space. And that time and place of space is going to be a God following them by God's tent and its tabernacle. And that tent and tabernacle, by the time we're done with this sort of section of Scripture, is going to be so different. Again, I keep going back to priestly kingdom and holy nation. The people of God are embodying in the commandments the character of Yahweh as they travel around for the hope for the world. And they're different. They're not like other nations. They are not like other nations. That is at the core of who God wanted his people of Israel to be. God wants the people to be a light to the nations. 2, that you've been blessed, so go be a blessing to all the nations of the earth. You are different than the inhabiting countries around you. You have a God that's kind of on the move, and God is with you. But yet they've settled into the promised land. And so how are they going to be now that they take this promised land? And you get this, what I think is a very alarming, intriguing, and interesting story we come with when we come to 1 Samuel 8. And we're going to read 1 Samuel 1 through probably quite a few verses, because 1 Samuel 8 down, because it's so interesting to me. I want us to get through some of these stories to get to the split of the northern and southern kingdom, even a little bit of geography, and then we're going to come back and do some concept work on holiness. So you have some of these stories of Samuel, and he kind of comes to the end of his days, and this is what happens in 1 Samuel 8. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not follow in his ways. They turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Oh, Uncle Andy just shook his head. Just tisk tisk. Like I thought he just shook your head. These sons, yet again, the next generation does not abide by the faithfulness of the ancestors that have gone before them. And they problematically did things that, if you remember a couple of weeks ago when we wrote on the board, what do we have problems with? Selfishness, right? Well, that was on the board. Well, it was greed, right? And injustices, right? Like some of the big problems of life that we see current day right here in 1 Samuel 8. These judges took their self-interest, they took greed, and the perversion of justice, which is very problematic no matter what century we're in. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, sorry, I didn't mean to laugh, but this is why I just laughed. I just gahoffed out loud. You are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us, then, a king to govern us, like other nations. Some of the most heartbreaking words in Scripture. They have been the set-apart people of God, the priestly kingdom and holy nation. And they come to Samuel and they say, let us be like other nations. But this displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to govern us. Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, just as they have done to me from the day I brought them out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me. Oh, the heartbreak, can you hear it? And serving other gods. So also they are doing to you. Now then, listen to their voice only. You shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them. This next paragraph from verse 10 to 18 is so powerful. There are two words I want you to listen for. Take and him his. Listen to what is the prophecy of Samuel for the people of God when they are going to be told what's going to happen when kingship takes over their lives, when they are not a shared governance of the people surrounded and led by God, but a king is over them like other nations. Listen to those two words, take in either his or him. So Samuel reported all of this, and he said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in this day. Can you hear in those words I have brought you up out of the land of Egypt from Pharaoh, and you are asking once again to be placed back into the system that you know doesn't work. Verse 19. But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, no, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we may be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles. Which, if you're paying attention in Joshua and Judges, that might be a good thesis statement. God is the one fighting the battles, not the people. This is just crushing. It's just absolutely this indictment upon themselves. And yet, I want you to come today, not with, yet again, being discouraged because they're so forgetful, but making sure that you have empathy for the decisions that at times people make. And again, this goes back to what Pastor John said about Revelation. It's not what's going to happen, it's what happens. This, to me, is an ongoing story. That's what we'll hopefully have a conversation about tonight, of what happens. And so the people of God are given a king, and they begin to understand themselves as people who are being ruled by a king. And the stories become, I hope that you enjoyed them this week. The stories are so interesting and colorful. Some of you are laughing, and maybe a little bit odd, and maybe a little bit twisted, maybe a little bit backward. But you have these big narratives with Saul and with David. David and Jonathan's quite the incredible narrative. You've got the death of Saul, and then you've got this, the kind of heartbreaking story of David and Bathsheba. Then you have Solomon coming along, and then the building of the temple. I want to get back to sort of this 1 Kings Samuel 8, what it means for us to be like other nations. But I wanted to make sure that when we look at especially day 5, when we think about the building and dedicating of the temple and sort of the end of this chapter, which brings us sort of this understanding of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom are going to be split. I'm going to do a little bit of geography on the board. But when you have a God who is on the move with God's people in a tent, who the people are going to be governed by sort of the togetherness of the project to love one another so the world might be loved. And that kind of breaks down as they take the land. It was Judy Cox many years ago when I was teaching disciple with her, when she was like, Jason, you're too hard on them. Have some empathy, because it was probably really hard for them to try to take possession of a land that they wanted to keep. How do you do that? And how do you fight off and ward off sort of the enemies surrounding you if you have to be sort of like want this word security to be part of your life? So Jason, she said, have some sympathy, have some empathy for the people who are doing their best to take care of and steward the land that God had given them. And I said, Judy, you always have empathy for everything. It reminded me of the time that the Oregon Ducks lost to the Auburn Tigers, the national championship game that my dad and I went to in Phoenix, Arizona. And we were so, they lost on the last minute field goal. My dad and I walked slowly back to our rental car, drove back to our hotel, did not say a word from the moment we left our seat till we fell asleep, till we got on the plane. And I remember just saying, we're like, and I think the first word, this may be revisionist history, but come on, we'll see what happens. I think I remember saying Dyer was down, because there's a particular play where we felt the player was down and he didn't call down. He ran it for a touchdown. I'm still mad about it. It's just now I don't remember why I told that story. What's that? My mom goes, well, she just goes, well, think about how good all those Auburn fans felt. And I remember being like, it's not what I want to feel. And the empathy is not the feeling emotion that I want right now, Mom. Thanks a lot for wanting to be always seeing the other person's side of every story with your gift of empathy. But yeah, there's something about what happens to the people of God when they're trying to take over this land that I do want us to have empathy for as they're trying to settle and protect this and be good stewards of the land they've given them. But everything changes. Everything changes. their understanding of who they are and what it means to be an Israelite takes radical focus, and it's changed completely in understanding our identity is going to lie in our kingship in the line of David, which you see to the time of Jesus, and into the time of Jesus, the temple of the Lord is going to be absolutely key. And we're going to have a first temple period, a second temple period, and then the desecration of the temple in 70 AD. So are going to have these three big timelines of temple worship that were so significant for the people of God. So the temple is built. The temple is going to be destroyed in what I'm going to say is the second exile. You're going to have an Assyrian exile and a Babylonian exile. We'll talk about that next week and maybe a little bit here, just a little bit when I draw the map on the board. And then you're going to have the temple being rebuilt when the people of God return home after exile. And then that temple is going to be destroyed in AD 70. There's going to be a first temple period, a second temple period, and then the desecration of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so there's these three big kind of moves of the temple, but it became the geographical place where God connected with God's people. It became the place where when people needed to gather together to be the people of God, they came to a place. And it really isn't until a synagogue becomes, so synagogue is going to be many temples, gatherings for the people of God in dispersion as the people of God are spread out across away from their homeland in Jerusalem. But that is going to be so significant because even before periods of synagogues, you're going to have just like, if you're going to worship, you're going to temple. That is where Yahweh connects with God's people. And so place became so central to their understanding of who they were. And in governance, the king became the ruler that in many ways was the understanding of how they connected in some ways with God. So we're going to have stories of King Josiah that just are so beautiful when it comes to good kings and bad kings. But the people of God kind of rose and fall with their character of their king as far as they were able to follow after God. And so just a little bit of map drawing, because I want us to make sure that when we get to next week, I feel like sometimes I get so excited to get to exile. I get so excited when we get to exile that I've forgotten, like, you need to know where we are before the people of God know how hard it was to lose what they had gotten. So I may have should have done some pre-drawing, but this is going to be the Mediterranean Sea. I don't have a blue. Purple has to work. The sea was angry that day, my friend. So the sea, this is the Mediterranean Sea, and this is going to be the Nile River. This is going to be Egypt, and our homeland is going to be on this edge of the Mediterranean Sea, going to be the country of Israel. So this is going to be our space. At the end of this chapter, we're going to have a split. I don't know if you can see that very good, Matthew, and maybe you can see it okay, Hannah. But you're going to have a split in the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom of Israel. And you need to know that in the southern kingdom of Israel is going to be the capital of Judah. So the northern kingdom is going to be called Israel. The southern kingdom is going to be called Judah. And the capital is going to be Jerusalem. So just for basic geography understanding of where the people of God have made their home, it's going to be on the sea of the Mediterranean Sea. It is going to be northern kingdom and southern kingdom, and the capital of where the temple lives, where God interacts with God's people, is going to be Jerusalem. And so the people of God have been, and if you remember back how important water is, there's going to be four major waterways. There's going to be Mediterranean Sea, the Nile Sea. There's going to be the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and then we're of course going to have the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River. But that's probably for next week. But at the end of this chapter, we have gone from not having a king to now having a king, having a few kings, and then having the falling apart of the kingdom and the breaking of that kingdom into northern kingdom and southern kingdom. So the politics of all time, if you think about how things break apart and countries fall apart and countries break up and even how denominations are formed and then split off, and then they split off. Like that, people don't get along, and you break into other factions of understanding of who you are. Well, what's going to happen next week is that you're going to have the Assyrian and Babylonian invasion of northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Israel. And so exile next week is going to be the enemies from the north, Assyria, coming down and capture the northern kingdom of Israel. And then you're going to have the kingdom of Babylon coming down and capturing the southern kingdom of Israel. They're going to have two different political strategies in their exile of the people of God away from their homeland. But the southern kingdom of Israel is going to rely on Egypt. Can you imagine those traitors? They're going to, out of fear for the enemies of the north, get in bed with their enemies from the south, try to ward off the deportation of their homeland. And so, in a quick kind of, this is what's happened over the next few centuries. I do this with King Cyrus coming later. So King Cyrus coming later after a couple of generations of exile, King Cyrus is going to come from the north, and King of Persia, and he's going to be able to bring conquering victory over the kingdom of Babylon, returning the people back to their homeland. So that is a quick geographical history lesson for you, and I'm going to show the board real quick, a little bit closer. So, that doesn't look too bad. There you go. So that's how I remember it with A, B, and C, right? Assyrian captivity, Babylonian captivity, and then King Cyrus of Persia, 1, 2, 3, coming and figuring out how the people of God. And so when we talk about exile, I just wanted you to be able to know the geography of it all, but more importantly, how the emotion of it. Just like the emotion of, we have conquered this land, we have taken this land, God has given us this land, and now we have a king who we have chosen to be over us, and now we have a temple where we know where God lives. And we need the people of God to be the people of God to keep this land, and they're going to forget, they're going to be forgetful, and they're going to lose the land. They're going to lose that land, and next week our chapter, I believe, is called Warning. And I believe the next week is called Consequences. I think that's how our two chapters for exile go. And we're going to figure out, like, what have we done? What do we do now? And this is all spoiler alerts, but I want you to be able to know that they're going to get the land back. And then it becomes a question: what do we do now? What kind of people are we going to be now that we've returned, that we can understand who we are? And so I remember preaching a lesson on exile at an assisted living facility, and I was just like, how many of you understand what exile is? And no one had really heard the term before. And these are like lifelong Christians, and I was like, I get so frustrated at sometimes of the lack of biblical literacy through the years. I want everyone to know most of your Bible is either about exile, written in exile, or figuring out what to do when you get back from exile. Like, this is the core Exodus and exile, the core stories that you really don't think you can understand Jesus without either one. And so if you've heard of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all of those, they're all about exile. And then most of the Deuteronomistic history that were covered, those are written in exile. It is the main focus of the whole Old Testament. And a lot of people have never heard or understand geographically or theologically what's happening. So I just kind of wanted to do like my early lesson on this to be able to, like, you guys need to know where it is and who it is and what happened and what was lost. So I want to make sure people are set up this week to know how important kingship was and how important temple was. God has given them this incredible gift of land, and they have, to the best of their ability, built a house for God to make a home. Now, it's questioned by some scholars, did God really want that home, or do the people of God want to build a home for God? I can see both sides. But there's something about how important it was for the people of God to have a home that they could call their own, and then have a temple that they could call God's home. And so it becomes their main identity, politically and religiously, the kingship and temple. So who they were religiously and politically became those two key words. They're going to be lost in in my idea, in a blink of an eye. In some ways, because I'm not sure how well kingship or temple worked. my friend Nicole has a husband named Matt, who, by the way, in Family Feud, when he said hi, I'm Matt, Nicole's husband. I loved it. It was a great line. I thought it was fantastic. But he has a great book about kind of God's ongoing incremental revelation of God's self to God's people over time. And I think that sometimes when people look back on the kingship period, they're like, you know what? There is something better for the people of God than being ruled by a king and having God in a box. And I think that's when we move to the idea of the Spirit and the church and the presence of the Spirit of God. So we're going to get to that in time. But you needed to kind of cover that. So I want us to move towards looking back at 1 Samuel 8. And my question is going to be, we'll stop the recording, and I've got 29% left on my battery, Hannah and Matthew. So we'll go as long as we can go. Hopefully we won't run out of gas. But I want us to read this because there's something about the word holiness being set apart that I want to maybe take our time today to kind of explore. So, and no, not even surprised. I have like 3 stories I'm going to share. So, the key kind of verse I found in 1 Samuel 8, verse 19 this week. I read it out loud. I'm going to read it again. But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, "No, but we are determined to be a king, to have a king over us, so that we might be like other nations." So, close my Bible. Whew, that's dangerous because you want to be reading from Scripture, not from Scripture. But there's something so interesting to me about the idea of what it means to be the set-apart people of God. So, I want you to be thinking about the idea. What does it mean to be set apart? What does it mean to be holy? What does it mean? And this is going to be our kind of looking into that word that Church of the Nazarene has taken as sort of one of our sacred words through the years. Article 10 in our Articles of Faith in the Church of the Nazarene Manual, sanctification. What does it mean to be the set-apart people of God? What does holiness look like? Andy just gave me a smirk, and I liked it because we took some of these same classes together. I graded some of his papers when we were in school.
I always remember the going before the district board, the Sanhedrin. You always know the question of what is sanctification to you, or what is holiness to you? Everybody has like a paragraph that they've memorized.
Okay, Andy, the Lawrences could not have heard that, so you have to say to get into this because it's too good. It's too good. Brenda, could you hand that to Andy?
When you apply for ministerial credentials, then you go through a district advisory board or something like that. But yeah, we called it the Sanhedrin because it felt like going in a room of like people just staring at you and asking you questions and, like, what is sanctification? So you have your paragraph that you've memorized to let you survive and live to see another day. Jason knows what I'm talking about.
I know, I'm part of the Sanhedrin now.
It's totally okay. Can you still hear us, guys, just to make sure? Okay, so that's fantastic, Andy, because that word holiness is so interesting. And my favorite professor and yours, Steve Green, in his class, Doctrine of Holiness, was able to kind of take us through what it means to be holy, kind of to the traditions of the Old Testament. And I've been thinking a lot about the lesson this week, well, after Family Feud. And I've really been curious, and hopefully we'll leave enough time for us to have conversation about it. But the people of God wanted to be the set-apart people of God. They didn't want to be set apart. And the temptation for them to be like other nations was so strong that they kind of say, we don't want to be priests of the kingdom, holy nation. We want to be like other nations. And I think that that's such an interesting thought process when it comes to the idea of holiness. Throughout Scripture, you have this set-apart people of God. What does it mean for us to be holy? And we have talked about this when it came to our idea of what it means to be people who dance. And I have a couple different stories for you.
Did they really want to be necessarily just like other nations, or did they just seek the structure?
That's it, Andy.
Because those are kind of two different things.
If they wanted to be like other nations, or they're seeking structure, and that's where my friend Judy came in and was like, Jason, you're being too hard on them. They needed security and structure, and so.
So I don't know, is a desire to be like everybody else,
Yeah.
His desire to feel taken care of, to have reliance on something bigger than themselves.
And
Yes.
consistency, right? I mean, they would have periods without judges, right?
Yes, and
Right, and they
there was always threat.
Things always went back.
There was always threat.
That's what I
And it
thought.
was like,
Droughts, or they
yes.
would lose some
Yes.
battles, or then they
Because I
weren't
think,
seen.
you know, even today, I can speak for myself. I seek structure. I tend to always look for structure. In any situation, environment, I'm always prone, you guys know that, I'm always prone to have structure. I don't like flying by the seat of my pants. You know, I don't like to go on vacation and just say, well, wing it. I like to have the itinerary, or at least, you know, now I've gotten where, okay, we can have boxes and blocks, so it doesn't have to be down to every 15-minute increments, like maybe earlier in my 20s or whatever. So now I can have, you know, 4 or 5 hour blocks of time that we're going to be here, then, and that. So I think, or I wonder, were the people more like that than they were just seeking to be like those other folks? Were they just seeking to have that consistency and
Andy, if you can't hear Matthew and Hannah, and for those who may be watching later, just that idea of, are they seeking more structure than they are the jealousy or the idea they want to be like other nations? And I've struggled with that even this week when I was thinking about the idea of, and that was Judy in my ear. That's kind of what I prefaced with. It's like, I remember a conversation about holiness. I think it's an interesting conversation, but also want to be able to have enough empathy for the people to say, security, and be good stewards of the land we've given us was a noble effort for the people of God. But Laura,
Well, I was maybe getting picked up. So, I also wondered about just like the tangibility of like seeing an actual physical leader. And then if we haven't like seen an example, like I think for us, because we have this, and then we can hope to see how does Jesus live, we can kind of live that way where like they didn't really have an example of how.
yeah, I mean, because you had all these judges that were kind of doing their own thing.
yeah.
So you had, you know, you're like, okay,
And it had been.
I go to always to sports analogies. You have your offensive coordinator trying to run the thing, but the running backs coach is doing their own thing. The offensive line is blocking a certain way. The receivers are running whatever they want to do. I mean, so it's like you can't move the
Not a
ball
team.
because everybody's on a different page. You got to get everybody on the same page.
Just political governance is one of the things Andy's talking about, and Cody's going to be next.
We can actually
Yeah.
hear the best.
Everyone's on the same page. Are we reading the same book? Matthew, did you want to say something?
I was gonna say we can actually hear him super
Just a second,
clear.
just a second. You're not on mute, but I should be able to hear you.
I think it's the other laptop.
We're off on our end. Sorry, but type it out to me. Let's hear from. Can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. All right. Okay, that's weird. Cody, go ahead.
So I was going to make an argument in defense of your lack of empathy for them and their seeking of structure because, I mean, as I read it, didn't God fill that role? And like when the bad things happened, wasn't it because like someone who like they had appointed as a judge or who was appointed as a judge kind of forgot and turned away from what God was wanting him to do or wanting them to do, you know, building the temples to, or the shrines to the gods of the people of the gods little g of the people of the area, the Baals, and kind of making decisions outside of the structure that was set forward for them in the laws that God gave them, and kind of forgetting about, you know, the presence that God had adds through the Ark of the Covenant, through the tabernacle, where, you know, even in like kind of tying it back to the verse, you know, it talked like God even says like that was the role I filled, but they want a earthly person in that role. So
Oh, well, thank you. I do think that there is maybe a both and when it comes to this scripture. We're looking at the people of God who I want us to have empathy for them to be able to say we cannot abide in this new space and to be good stewards of it if we don't have a political body that sort of oversees who we are. So there is kind of this maybe like kind of like just idealistic Jason to be like, couldn't they have done it on their own, right? Because there is sort of this sense of we need something to be able to get us through. The line in 1 Samuel 8 becomes so significant to me as I think about us personally. I'm looking back at last couple of classes, and I thought some of the most interesting kind of conversations were the question, what does this mean in kind of modern day church? For wanting us to be the called out, set apart people of God. What is our temptation as individuals, as a church, to be like other nations? Does that make sense as a question? And I would love for you to sort of be interested in tackling that at all and do that out loud. So we'd love to pass. We can't pass the microphone around. The microphone died. So Matthew said they can hear us from that computer, but they can't. We can't hear them. So thanks for staying with us as long as you can, guys. But there is just a sense of that question. I think that there is a desire for us as believers, set apart as we are, the temptation to go ahead and sort of feel like, what are the temptations for us to be like the Israelites in this modern day and age? Does that make sense?
Something just occurred to me that because of the tangibility of it. And they didn't have many options to look at, kings or a pharaoh or whatever. But with the golden calf, Moses was their connection to God, and Moses stayed away long enough that they didn't know what to do about it. I think the judges didn't always live up to what they were supposed to be, and they didn't know how to fill that void, maybe. And they look around and what do they see? They see king, they see pharaohs, they see whatever. And I don't know as recent nomads if they had enough confidence in themselves or awareness or whatever you want to call it to be any more creative than that. It's like the Israelites were pretty concrete people. I want to reach out and touch it.
Or looking for it.
Yeah, I want to look at it. I want to touch it. I want to, anytime, day or night.
Well, they didn't have the Holy Spirit, that would make sense.
Yeah, it does.
Totally.
It does. It's like the thing with the temple. They can sacrifice in the temple. They cannot sacrifice in a synagogue. There are no sacrifices.
To give them the structure.
Yeah.
It sounds like this. As you read the story, it sounds like they were desperately needing something to be able to call their own.
But rather than asking God for, well, now what do we do? What do they turn and say, okay, we've tried God. That kind of fell flat. Maybe I'm hypothesizing, but we want something other. We want something other, and this is the only other that we know how.
But God warned them that
Yeah,
that
but
they were giving him they were turning away from him, saying, "You're not good enough."
well, and they may have felt that way.
Yeah.
Looking at the judges as God's representatives or something, rather than saying, okay, God, is there something different that you and us can do or whatever? The Israelites were rather short-sighted people.
Yes, and I love when you say the Israelites because it's you saying me, you are short-sighted people.
Oh, yeah, I am.
When I say Israel, when I hear Israel, I'm like usually like I need to put myself in that sentence. Because I think this is what, again, not just what happened, but what happens, right? I think that there are desires for us to look for security outside of God. There are desires for us to look for power examples rather than looking for discernment and wisdom. There are examples throughout history for us to be able to, as believers. It's at 7:45. I'm kind of answering some of my own questions for you as I was thinking this week, and maybe you can give me some feedback. But like, as I was thinking this week, and I was looking back at some of my last notes, some of my last videos, I was struck by the idea of, I think one of the more interesting examples that were given was the temptation for us to lean on the rules rather than discernment when it comes to security. As a modern day preacher, when I talk to Steve, when I talk to John, I think the project is for us is to be able to give you the Spirit of God in community, to lean on discernment and wisdom to be kingdom preachers in the world. And at times the response is, not you folks, but times because you're indecisive. And you're looking for wisdom and discernment. But at times there are people who've come to us and they've said, what do I have to do to get into heaven? Now that is a short-sighted believer. I believe that is a short-sighted believer. But I believe that I think that is a equivalency of the people of God wanting to be like other nations, being like, hey, give me a to-do list. I want to, what can I do to inherit the kingdom of heaven? You see that when we have, that question is said to Jesus when he immediately gives the story of the Good Samaritan. Again, Jesus gives the story of the Good Samaritan, he gives Shema, when they be like, what do I have to do to, I think it's a shortcut. Like, I think what oftentimes the temptation for us is not discernment and wisdom and lean on the Spirit of God. At times, the shortcut, the question in modern day America is, what must I do to be in heaven for eternity? And I think that part of the project here for us has been, we want that for everyone. But we want your eternal security with Jesus in heaven as the resurrection of the body to be in the end game for this whole project. There's so much more than that. Like, it's not a list of things you can check off to do. It is who you are in God and how loved you are. The project goes back to Genesis 12. If you've been loved, so go love all people. And I think that my holiness is going to look different than your holiness. That it's not necessarily a set box of rules that you can all follow to get something. Those habits and practices are supposed to, I think, give you the idea of what it means for you to be a discerning wisdom person, who's a kingdom person, loves Jesus, and in your own context, love others. The way that Nicole loves people is going to be way different than mine. The way that Brenda loves people is going to be different than Allie. Like, it's just, we are all contextual beings with different ideas of wisdom and discernment, not if we can just give you this box, fill in the blank idea, and be like, here's what I've got to do to do it. And do you think it would?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the human condition in all of us is wanting that box and wanting to know everything black and white. And, you know, and I've always struggled with that, frankly, because that's tends to be how I'm hardwired, is very regimented, very right and wrong or indifferent. So as I start to consider some of this and holiness and discernment and some other things, it's because, to your point, everybody's different. Everybody's going to see some things different. And not to get super controversial, but that's okay. And getting to the point of understanding the differences, some people may do something you think is wrong. And maybe they're espousing similar beliefs, but you just are on the different page a little bit. But how's your reaction to those people is what I think I'm learning myself. I mean, I'm just internalizing this. Is what is my reaction whenever I face that? In the past, frankly, I would be relatively harsh a little bit, as 30 years ago, 20 years ago. But now I've gotten to a point, I don't know if it's age, I don't know what it is, of understanding that, you know, just because people are coming from a different place, part of it is literally that. They're coming from a different place, a different perspective, a different background, different, you know, demographic. All these things shape your beliefs and where you come, and that becomes who you are. And if they then go a different route than how you would handle a situation, it's not mine to condemn, even if I honestly feel it's wrong. It's mine to, how am I going to interact with those folks? And not in a condemning way, but not necessarily in an accepting way. You can accept the person, but not what they're doing. And sometimes that's hard. But I mean, I think that's where I'm starting to come is continuing to try to learn how to accept the people, accept where they're at, and try to, you know, just see them for who they are. Because I want the same for me, frankly. Because, you know, if I had people looking at me as harshly as I did other people probably 20, 30 years ago, I guarantee you I wouldn't have measured up very well, even though I thought I was pretty good and you know, I had it all together. I've learned I still don't have it all together. I don't know if any of that made sense.
Oh, 100%. I think the project of being Christian is complex. And I think that holiness word is a complex word. That I think when I was younger, it meant something different than it means now. And I guess I've been a pastor long enough to recognize that you all face challenges in your day-to-day life where you are making consistent choices, follow after Jesus in creative ways in complex situations. And I believe through discernment, wisdom, and the Spirit, believe kind of what Brene Brown says about giving people a generous story, but doing the best you can with what you've been given time to follow after Jesus. And I think it's a challenge. I think it's an absolute challenge in modern day America where most of us live to be able to say, what are the kingdom values to be able to believe and behave in the world with the WWJ generation. I don't pretend to think that you guys go out into the world in your normal lives, because I work here in this hallway and I'm making constant choices about what it means to live with Jesus, and I get paid to be a Christian. So last week I said it again. I mean, it's like I am making choices, and sometimes it's even hard in a hallway of a Christian church to make sure that I'm making good habits, not forget, because I think that at times, 2 years ago, the group said the modern day temptation is to hire you to do all of the work of being a Christian, and so we can pay you to be our leader and not necessarily feel like we have to go out during Monday through Saturday to, you know, be the Christian, to visit people, to be generous, to make sure we pray, to make sure we read the Bible, because we're paying you to do that. Now I don't know if that's true for everybody. But they were convinced that was the modern day temptation in this scripture, to be like, and that made me think about my friends who are Latter-day Saints of the oftentimes referred to as the Mormon church. Like the job of the pastor, they do themselves. Like they fill the pulpit, they call on the sick, they feed their neighbors. Like it is a priesthood of believers that there is no, like I have a very close friend that's Mormon, and she thinks it's bizarre that I get paid to do everything that they just do as the church. Like you do that, why don't the church members do that? Like that's the job of the priesthood of believers to do those things. Like, yeah, we divvy up all the sick amongst the congregation. And they go visit the sick. And we bring meals and like we go pray with people. Like, but your job should be obsolete. Like, you should not be a professional Christian. That should be divvied up amongst everybody in the congregation. And I'm like, stop taking my job because I like what I get to do. So it's just that was an interesting answer for the temptation of this. But I find it when I think about you now. I think that you have complex situations and choices to make on a continual basis. And I think the question of like, do I want to be Christian or do I want to look like